Most of us grow up with a very clear definition of evil. We picture a sinister force, an inherent moral failing designed to corrupt the human soul and drive people to inflict harm. But historical evidence suggests the exact opposite. The concept of evil was originally engineered by dissidents as a technology to liberate humanity from authoritarian control. When you realize that our deepest taboos were born underground as tools of resistance, the way we look at modern power dynamics and state control completely flips. To find the origins of this idea, we have to look at the ancient transition of human civilization. Society shifted from localized, matriarchal fertility worship into massive, patriarchal empires governed by rigid, monotheistic religions. As the new empires enforced strict obedience, the old fertility cults were suppressed. They went underground, forming a network known as mystery schools. These were highly secretive organizations where initiates preserved ancient polytheistic rituals and protected a central, hidden doctrine that the universe was actually created through human imagination. These underground societies taught that strict obedience to a single absolute authority was a trap. In their view, defying the rules, making mistakes, and actively transgressing were necessary steps for an individual to achieve spiritual redemption and personal growth. Because they valued rebellion, these groups reframed the ultimate antagonist of the dominant religion. To them, the serpent, or Satan, was not a monster. He was a hero who offered humanity the forbidden fruit of knowledge and self-awareness. In the ancient world, evil was synonymous with individual defiance. It was a calculated intellectual rebellion against an oppressive system. The ruling class eventually recognized that the human desire to rebel could never be entirely erased by force alone. So they absorbed the concept of transgression directly into the state apparatus. In 1513, a Florentine diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli officially severed political leadership from traditional Christian ethics. He championed a new framework called political virtue. In this context, political virtue means a ruler's adaptability and ruthless effectiveness in maintaining the state, operating completely independent of conventional morality. Machiavelli argued that a successful leader must actively learn how not to be good. When the survival of the state is at risk, cruelty, deception, and the breaking of promises become necessary, practical instruments of governance. By adopting this philosophy, the state weaponized the tools of the rebel. Strategic immorality transitioned from a subversive underground act of liberation into the primary mechanism for maintaining social order. Fast forward to the 20th century, and this strategic immorality reached its industrialized peak. Modern totalitarian regimes optimized the state's use of evil, stripping away individual passion and replacing it with cold, automated systems. When philosopher Hannah Arendt covered the trials of Holocaust organizers, she was shocked by the men in the courtroom. Sitting in the dock was Adolf Eichmann. He did not look like a monster or a bloodthirsty fanatic. He looked like an unsettlingly ordinary clerk. Arendt coined the term the banality of evil to explain this phenomenon.
The banality of evil is the theory that the greatest atrocities are committed by ordinary people who thoughtlessly obey administrative routines and accept the premises of their system, rather than acting out of sociopathic malice. The state successfully removed individual human agency from the act of doing harm. The passionate, transgressive rebel of the ancient world was entirely replaced by the thoughtless, obedient cog in a machine. But why would a modern state build a machine to harm its own citizens in the first place? To answer this, philosopher Michel Foucault identified a shift in governance he called biopolitics. Biopolitics is the method by which modern states manage the biological metrics of entire populations, tracking birth rates, monitoring public health and life expectancy, rather than just threatening individual bodies with physical punishment. This flowchart illustrates the core paradox of biopolitics. How does a state explicitly dedicated to fostering life and protecting public health justify the systematic execution or elimination of its own people? Foucault argued the answer is state racism. By categorizing specific, marginalized groups as biological threats or impurities, the state frames their elimination as a strict medical necessity. The destruction of a minority becomes a required treatment to purify the broader society. Combine Arendt's obedient clerks with Foucault's biological categorization, and a dark truth emerges. Modern systemic evil requires absolutely no personal malice or hatred. It only requires administrative logic. It is tempting to dismiss these bureaucrats as blind, helpless cogs who have no choice but to follow orders. However, historical records show that mid-level managers in totalitarian systems act as highly competitive entrepreneurs, actively innovating new policies to impress their superiors. This 1941 document, signed by Hermann Göring, shows how genocidal intent relies on literal paperwork to function. The authorization for the final solution is formatted identically to a mundane organizational directive, complete with standard margins, routing instructions, and dry administrative phrasing. We can observe how this administrative machinery operates today in this diagram, which models the data-driven systems used to systematically erase Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. State directives filter into digital spreadsheets, converting human lives into sterile metrics like ideological scores. These clean euphemisms create moral distance. When training completion replaces indefinite detention, ordinary workers execute horrific policies, feeling they are simply doing their jobs. The most destructive power on Earth today is not a nuclear warhead or a standing army. It is the cold, optimized indifference of organizational rationality. Thousands of years ago, the mystery schools defined evil as an act of individual rebellion against a rigid system. Today, the system itself has monopolized the concept, automating transgression into a daily bureaucratic routine. This leaves us with a highly uncomfortable question. How many modern citizens operate as complicit cogs, sanitizing environmental destruction or economic exploitation, or human suffering through standard operating procedures? When authority institutionalizes thoughtlessness to optimize control, the ultimate transgressive act of rebellion isn't a grand display of violence. It is simply choosing to think.